Thought moving in with my son after my hip replacement would be temporary. 3 months at most, that's what we'd agreed on. 3 months while I healed, while I learned to walk without the walker, while I figured out what came next for a 64-year-old woman living alone in a house that had always felt too big, even before my husband passed. That was 8 months ago. My husband Walter had been gone for 11 months when the surgery happened. 41 years we were married. 41 years of the same coffee maker, the same side of the bed, the same argument about whether the thermostat should be set at 68 or 72. When he died, the quiet in that house wasn't peaceful. It was a different kind of quiet altogether, the kind that sits on your chest. So when my son Colin called and said, "Mom, just come stay with us while you recover," it felt like a lifeline. He and his wife Serena had a big colonial in Naperville just outside Chicago. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a yard the grandkids never used because they were always on their tablets. There was a room on the main floor, right off the kitchen, originally meant to be a home office. They put a bed in it for me. It had its own small bathroom. It was perfect, Colin said. It made sense. I believed him. Serena was pleasant enough when I arrived. She helped me carry in my bags, made a pot of decaf, showed me where they kept the extra towels. She was the kind of woman who smiled with her whole face, but whose eyes didn't always follow along. I'd noticed that about her before, at holidays, at the grandkids' birthday parties. I'd told myself I was being unfair. She worked hard. She was a real estate broker, always on her phone, always staging something or closing something. She was busy. People who are busy sometimes forget to let their eyes smile. Their 2 kids, Tyler and Mia, were 9 and 11. Good kids, mostly. They'd hug me when they remembered to and ignore me when they didn't. Normal kids. I didn't hold it against them. The first few weeks were fine. My hip was improving. The physical therapist came 3 times a week. I'd take slow walks around the block in the afternoons when the weather allowed. Colin would bring me tea in the evenings, sit with me for 20 minutes before Serena called him upstairs for something. We'd talk about nothing, the Cubs, a documentary he'd been watching, whether Tyler was adjusting to his new school. Small talk, but it felt good. It felt like family. I started noticing things around week 5. Not anything I could name right away. Just a feeling, the kind that settles in your gut before your brain catches up. Serena started asking me questions about Walter's accounts. Casual questions, the kind you could dismiss if you heard them one at a time. She asked once about whether I used a financial advisor. She asked another time about whether Walter had left everything in a trust or outright. She mentioned, almost in passing, that a woman she knew had been surprised by estate taxes and wondered if I'd looked into that. I answered her questions. I had no reason not to. Walter had been careful with money. His pension from 30 years at the plant, his 401k, his life insurance. None of it was a secret. There was a quarterly distribution that came into my checking account, part of the annuity he'd set up before he got sick. He'd wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of for at least 10 years. He was thorough like that, methodical. I used to tease him about his spreadsheets. I missed those spreadsheets. I missed him so much some days that I'd stand in the kitchen making toast and just stop. Just stand there with the butter knife in my hand until the toast got cold. Around week 6, I noticed Colin was quieter than usual, less likely to come sit with me in the evenings. When I'd walk into a room where he and Serena were talking, the conversation would stop in a way that felt different from a natural pause. Not hostile, exactly, just careful. I told myself I was reading into things. Grief does that. It makes you suspicious of kindness and paranoid about silence. My therapist had warned me about this in the first months after Walter died. She'd called it hypervigilance. the nervous system stuck in scanning mode, looking for threats that weren't there. But then came the Wednesday night. It was around 11:15. I'd gone to bed early because my hip had been aching, and I'd taken one of the prescription anti-inflammatories the orthopedist had given me. I woke up parched, the way you do with those pills, and shuffled out to the kitchen in my robe for a glass of water. Colin and Serena's home office was just off the hallway between my room and the kitchen. The door was cracked open. The light was on. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was trying to get water. But I heard my name, not a casual mention. Not the way you say someone's name when you're talking about what to make for dinner. It was quiet and deliberate. I stopped walking. I stood in the dark hallway and I listened. Serena's voice, low and clipped. The distribution hits her account on the 15th. That's consistent. Every quarter. Colin said something I couldn't make out. I'm not saying all of it, Serena said. Just a portion. She doesn't check that account regularly. She told me herself she barely looks at it. I pressed my back against the wall. My heart was going fast. She's going to notice eventually. Colin's voice clearer now. He sounded uncertain. Not if we do it gradually. Small transfers. I've been reading about this. If it's under 10,000 each time, it doesn't trigger anything. What about the power of attorney? That's what the notary is for. She trusts us. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her if I tell her it's routine estate paperwork. I stopped breathing for a moment. The power of attorney they were referring to was something Serena had brought up 2 weeks earlier. She'd said it was something my attorney had recommended, that since I'd been recovering from surgery and living with them temporarily, it made sense to have a document in place just in case something happened, just in case I had a medical emergency and someone needed to make financial decisions on my behalf. She'd framed it as protective, sensible. She'd said she'd have the forms drawn up by someone at her office. I'd said I'd think about it. I hadn't signed anything yet. I went back to my room. I didn't get the water. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and I thought about Walter, about what he would do. Walter, who had been suspicious of everyone until they gave him a reason not to be. Walter, who had always said, "Vera, you are too trusting. You see the best in people before they've earned it." He'd been right about that. He'd been right about a lot of things. I didn't sleep that night. I went over everything I could remember, every question Serena had asked, every time Colin had seemed uncomfortable when I mentioned the finances, every moment I dismissed as grief-distorted paranoia. I pulled up my banking app on my phone and sat in the dark, going through the last 3 months of transactions. Nothing was missing yet. But I was looking at the account I checked regularly, my regular checking, my grocery money, my bills. I hadn't looked at the annuity account in weeks. When I opened it, I sat very still for a long time. 3 transfers. The first one 6 weeks ago, almost $2,000 to an account number I didn't recognize. Then $4,500. Then just under $8,000. Total, just over $14,000. I had not made those transfers. I set the phone face down on the mattress and put my hands in my lap and sat there until the sky outside started to go gray. I am 64 years old. I taught high school English for 27 years. I have read every kind of story there is. Tragedies and comedies and everything in between, and I know how they work. I know what happens when the person who has been wronged falls apart. I know what happens when they don't. I decided I was not going to fall apart. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed. I made myself coffee. I said good morning to Serena when she came downstairs in her blazer, already on her phone. I asked Colin if he wanted eggs. He said no, he was running late. I watched them move through their morning routine, and I cataloged everything. The way Serena glanced at my coffee mug. The way Colin avoided my eyes when I asked how he'd slept. "Fine," he said. "Just tired." I said I understood. After they left and the kids were at school, I called my attorney. His name is Arthur, and he'd handled Walter's estate from the beginning. He's in his late 60s, semi-retired, but he'd known Walter for 30 years through the Rotary Club, and he'd always been straight with us. "Arthur," I said when he picked up, "I need your help, and I need you to keep this between us." He didn't ask a lot of questions. He listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Vera, do not sign anything. Do not let anyone present documents to you without calling me first. I'm going to refer you to a colleague who handles elder financial abuse." Today, elder financial abuse. I'd heard that phrase before in news stories, in cautionary articles forwarded by friends. I had never in my life imagined it would apply to me. To my son. I spent the rest of that day on my phone, carefully, quietly, between the physical therapist's visit and the kids coming home from school. I called the bank's fraud department and reported unauthorized transfers from my annuity account. The representative walked me through the process. We flagged the 3 transfers and froze future outgoing transactions pending an investigation. She told me to file a police report, which would help the bank's case. I said I would. Then I went to Walgreens and bought 2 things: a digital voice recorder, the kind that looks like a USB drive, and a small magnetic phone mount that I could use to position my phone for video without it being obvious. I wasn't going to let them get away with it, but I needed proof, not suspicion, not hurt feelings, not a grieving widow's account of things she'd overheard in a hallway. Proof. I set up the phone mount on my nightstand, angled toward the door. I kept the voice recorder in the pocket of my cardigan. I started leaving my bedroom door open slightly in the evenings instead of closing it all the way, something I'd always done for privacy. Now I wanted to hear. Thursday came. The 15th, the quarterly distribution had hit my account. I knew because I'd checked, but I didn't react, didn't mention it. I made dinner that night, the pasta dish with sausage that Colin had always liked growing up. I set the table. I poured iced tea. Serena was in a good mood, animated, chatty, asking the kids about their days. She offered to clear the table when we were done, which she almost never did. Colin looked like a man who was trying very hard to act normal and didn't quite know how. After the kids went upstairs, Serena said she had some paperwork she wanted to go over with me. "Just routine," she said. "Estate planning, like we'd talked about." She said she had a notary coming to the house at 8. I said that was fine. I said I'd look at whatever she had. I went to my room to get my reading glasses. I turned on my phone's video recording, propped it on the nightstand with the mount, and adjusted it until the angle covered the chair beside my bed where I knew Serena would sit. Then I put on my glasses and went back to the living room and sat down. The notary arrived at 8. A young woman I'd never met, professional, carrying a leather folder. Serena laid out several documents on the coffee table and began explaining them. She spoke quickly, using phrases like durable power of attorney and financial agent designation and standard estate planning language. She kept saying, "This is all just to protect you, Vera, just in case something happens." I asked if I could take the documents to review with my own attorney before signing. Serena's expression shifted, just slightly. She said, "Of course, but really these are very standard. There's no need to wait. The notary's already here." I said I'd still prefer to have Arthur look them over. "Old habit," I said. "Walter always said never sign anything you haven't had reviewed." The notary looked at Serena. Serena smiled at me with her whole face again. "We can schedule another time," the notary said. "That's completely fine." Colin, who had been standing near the kitchen doorway, left the room. I heard the back door open and close. He was outside, even though it was 40 degrees. After the notary left, I excused myself to bed. I stopped the recording on my phone and uploaded it to my cloud storage before I even took off my glasses. Over the next 10 days, I gathered everything I could. I asked Arthur's colleague, a woman named Patricia, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases, to advise me on what evidence would be most useful. She was methodical and kind and did not treat me like a confused old woman, which I appreciated more than I could say. She told me to document the transfers I'd found, to preserve any text messages or written communications, and to keep the recordings secure and backed up in multiple places. I had text messages from Serena referencing the power of attorney documents. I had the voice recording of the night I'd overheard them in the office. I had documentation of the 3 transfers, totaling over $14,000, made from my annuity account without my authorization. And I had the conversation from Thursday evening on video, including Serena's insistence that I sign without my attorney present. Patricia contacted the Naperville Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. A detective called me the following Tuesday while Colin and Serena were both out. He was thorough and professional. He asked me to come in, which I did that afternoon, taking a rideshare because I didn't want to ask anyone in that house for anything. I gave him everything. He told me to act normal for a few more days while they completed their review. He said these cases required documentation that was airtight. I said I understood. I'd been a teacher. I knew what it meant to build an argument before you made it. That Friday, I was in the kitchen making lunch when Colin came in. He sat down at the table and looked at me in a way he hadn't looked at me in months. Like himself. Like the boy who used to sit on the counter while I made dinner and tell me about his day. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." I sat down across from him. He told me that Serena had been managing their finances for the past 2 years. He told me that their mortgage was significantly underwater, that they'd refinanced twice, that they owed more than they'd ever be able to recoup from the sale. He told me that Serena's brokerage had been struggling and that she'd lost 2 major listings in the same quarter. He told me they were close to $50,000 in credit card debt. He told me it was Serena's idea. He said he'd gone along with it because he didn't know what else to do. He said he knew it was wrong. He said he was sorry. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I said, "I know, Colin. I've known for almost 2 weeks." His face went very still. I told him about the recordings, about the bank, about Patricia and the detective. I told him calmly, the way you'd explain something to a student who'd made a serious mistake and needed to understand the full weight of it. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I was just telling him the truth. He put his head in his hands. The police came the next morning. 2 officers, the detective I'd spoken to, and a representative from the Financial Crimes Division. Colin and Serena were both home. The kids were at school. I had made arrangements the night before for Tyler and Mia to go to a neighbor's house after school, a family they knew well. I didn't want them to come home to this. Serena tried to minimize everything. She said the transfers had been a loan, something we'd discussed. She said I'd given informal consent. She said I was grieving and had probably forgotten. The detective said the evidence didn't support that account. Colin didn't say much. He looked like a man who had already accepted what was coming. They were both charged. Financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery related to the unsigned power of attorney documents Serena had pre-filled, and unauthorized transfer of funds. Serena's charges were more serious because she'd initiated the scheme and prepared the forged documents. Colin cooperated fully with investigators, which his attorney told him later would matter at sentencing. Serena got 4 years. Colin received a suspended sentence with 3 years of probation, mandatory financial restitution, and required counseling. Some people will say that's too light. Maybe they're right. I've had time to think about it. What I know is that I did not make the sentencing decision, and that the justice system, imperfect as it is, had access to all of the same evidence I did. I recovered all $14,000 plus legal fees through the civil suit Patricia helped me file. The bank's investigation confirmed the unauthorized transfers, and my homeowner's insurance had a provision for financial elder abuse that I'd had no idea existed before any of this. Walter had been thorough, even about the insurance policy. I moved out of Colin's house the week after the arrests. I didn't go back to my old house right away. I stayed with my friend Roberta in Oak Park for 6 weeks, sleeping in her guest room, eating her cooking, letting myself be taken care of by someone who actually meant it that way. Then I went home. I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen where Walter's coffee mug was still in the cabinet where he'd left it. I sat at the table where he'd done his spreadsheets. I opened the windows. The house didn't feel too quiet anymore. It just felt like mine. The kids, Tyler and Mia, they still call me on Sundays. I was afraid they'd be confused or angry, and they are sometimes, in the way kids are when they don't have words for what they're feeling. But they call. I pick up every time. Colin writes to me. Not every week, but often enough. He's in counseling. He and Serena are separated. He's renting an apartment closer to his job in Lyle. He says he thinks about his father a lot. He says he's sorry in a different way each time, which makes me think he's actually working through something real rather than just repeating a script. I don't know if I'll forgive him. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a switch you flip. It's a direction you walk in, slowly, over a long time, and some days you cover ground and some days you don't. What I know is this. I am 64 years old. I cook my own meals. I manage my own finances, with help now from a certified financial planner Walter would have liked. A straightforward man named Frank who explains everything twice and never makes me feel foolish for asking questions. I go to physical therapy twice a week, still because my hip is better but not finished healing. I call Roberta on Tuesday evenings. I have coffee with my neighbor Wanda on Thursday mornings. I am reading my way through the novels I assigned to students for 27 years and never had time to actually love. I am not a cautionary tale. I am not a case study. I am not the woman in the news segment who was too trusting and paid for it. I am a woman who was wronged by people she loved and who did something about it before they could take anything more. I gathered the evidence. I made the calls. I sat across from a detective and a financial crimes attorney and an insurance adjuster and a civil court judge, and I told my story clearly, and I was believed. Walter always said I had good instincts. He said I second-guessed them too often, that I talked myself out of what I already knew. He was right about that too. I don't do that anymore. On the hard days, when the house feels big again and I wake up at 3 in the morning and reach for someone who isn't there, I sit up and I think about what I did. I think about the voice recorder in my cardigan pocket and the phone propped on the nightstand and the call I made to Arthur from my kitchen while the physical therapist was packing up her bag in the other room. I think about myself, 64 years old, 11 months out from the worst loss of my life, and I think about how I didn't fall apart. Not because I was fearless. I was terrified. I cried in Roberta's bathroom for 45 minutes the night before the police came, but I didn't let the fear decide. Walter would be proud. I know that with the same certainty. I know my own name. He would sit across from me at this kitchen table, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, and he would look at me the way he did sometimes when I'd handled something difficult at school, or stood my ground with someone who needed standing up to. And he would not say anything for a long moment, and then he'd say, "That's my Vera." "Yeah, Walter, that's me." People ask me sometimes how I caught them. Like there was a trick to it, some special skill or instinct that set me apart. There wasn't. What I had was a Tuesday night, a thirsty throat, and 41 years of being married to a man who told me to trust what I already knew. What I already knew, even before I could name it, was that something was wrong. The way Serena's questions about my finances came in clusters, casual and spaced out, like she was hoping I wouldn't connect them. The way Colin left the room when things got close to the truth, the way the transfers had been sized carefully, deliberately, to stay below the threshold that triggers a bank alert. That kind of carefulness doesn't come from desperation. It comes from planning. And planning means choice. That's the part I had to sit with for a long time. Not the betrayal itself, but the fact that it was chosen. Colin knew what he was doing. He chose it anyway. He chose it not once, but over weeks. Every time he sat across from me at that dinner table and said nothing. Every time I asked how he'd slept and he said fine. Every action has a chain behind it, a set of decisions that led there. And every one of those decisions was made by a person who understood the difference between right and wrong, and picked wrong anyway. And the consequences followed just as surely. Not because the universe runs on some invisible scoreboard, but because that's how cause and effect actually works in human lives. When you build something on deception, the foundation is deception. It doesn't hold. It doesn't matter how careful you are, how gradual the transfers are, how perfectly you think you've controlled the situation. The structure fails because it was never sound. Serena lost her career. Colin lost his marriage, his home, and the trust of the one parent he had left. The thing they were trying to protect, their financial stability, was destroyed by the very method they used to try to save it. I think about what I did differently, and it comes down to 3 things. I paid attention when my instincts spoke, even when I wanted to dismiss them as grief-distorted paranoia. I acted without letting fear make the decision for me. And I built my case before I made my move, because righteous anger without evidence is just noise, and I needed to be heard. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not that you should be suspicious of everyone who loves you. Not that family can't be trusted, but that your instincts are worth listening to. That being kind does not require being passive, and that intelligence in the service of self-protection is not coldness. It's survival. Vera didn't become ruthless that night. She stood in the hallway. She became clear. There's a difference. I spent 27 years teaching teenagers that their choices define them, not their circumstances, not their excuses, not the pressure they were under. I believed it then. I believe it more now. Colin was under real pressure. The debt was real. The fear was real. And he still had a choice. He could have come to me. He could have said, "Mom, we're drowning." I would have helped. Instead, he let Serena lead them both somewhere they couldn't come back from the same way they'd left. That's not my tragedy. That's theirs. Mine was much smaller, and I survived it. I went home. I opened the windows. I learned my own name again, the one Walter used to say when I'd handled something hard. That's my Vera. Yeah, that's me.